let's just go to let's make sure we get this now. This is Michael Geist. We're going to talk Canadian law stuffs. But for Americans or anyone abroad watching, well, in Europe, it's probably too late. You probably already have stuff like this. In America, if you think this is purely Canadian and therefore not of interest to you, may I suggest stuff trickles downhill, as we say. And one way or another, Canada influences the US and the US influences Canada. And I dare say we influence each other. And that's why we're seeing this stuff. But this is Michael Geist. And if I'm not mistaken, I pulled this from his Twitter. No, I pulled this from a search. He's M. Geist on Twitter. He's following this very closely. And his headline is, why has the government's defense of Bill C-11 been so cartoonishly misleading? And this is the new minister. He replaced Guilbeault, who was selling us on Bill C-10, who was also, I'm not going to say cartoonishly misleading. I'll take it one step further. Cartoonishly dishonest. And this, so Bill C-10, everybody knows it was supposed to treat online broadcasters. You know, it was initially sold as going for the Hulus, the Netflix, what else is there? HBO's online, to govern them the way the Broadcasting Act in Canada governs radio and television. The idea being that, you know, it's the modern era. Nobody's watching TV. No one's listening to radio. But so everyone's online. And so, you know, these broadcasters, which would have been governed on TV by the Broadcasting Act, are now operating freely on the interwebs. So the C-10 was going to put broadcasters under the governance of the Broadcasting Act, which would impose certain standards of content, certain criteria for Canadian content. It would require, I think, payment of certain amounts. It would provide for the imposition of fines in the event that those governed did not comply with the act. It was sold as only, you know, it was going to apply to broadcasters, YouTube, Hulu, Netflix, and whatever, because they have found a way to circumvent existing law. It became exceedingly clear that they wanted to govern all online content. And whereas at one point the concern was that, hey guys, what you're doing now is going to cover individual social media accounts. And they said, oh no, that's not our intention. That was Guilbeault. And I'm not going to make fun of him because someone can accuse me of making fun of what might be a speech impediment, and that's not my intent at all. So I'm not going to do it. But Guilbeault comes out and says, that's not our intention at all. We don't want to go after your social media account. It's just intended to govern broadcasters. In Bill C-10, for those of you who don't know, they included an exclusion. It said this law will specifically not apply to social media accounts, to individual YouTube channels, to individual Facebook pages, to individual Twitter handles. The Liberal government in the dead of the night removed that exclusion. And then they were saying, well, why'd you remove the exclusion if the law is not going to cover individual social media accounts? Why'd you remove the exclusion? Guilbeault says in a convoluted, incomprehensible answer, the exclusion, it doesn't matter. We're not going to include them anyhow. But we removed the exclusion that specified that we were not going to cover them. Then later on admitted, yes, we're going to come after individual social media accounts if they're big enough that they can be deemed to be broadcasters. The law died because it never got through the Senate before the parliamentary session ended. The law was dead. Bill C-11 picks up from there. That's the context. I just want to see one chat before it disappears. You know what? Forget it. So that's the context to Bill C-11, and C-11 is not the predecessor, the one that comes after. Why has the government's defense of Bill C-11 been so cartoonishly misleading? Bill C-11, the online streaming act that serves as the government's follow-up to Bill C-10, was the subject of debate. It's got to be debated. There's a first reading, second reading, third reading, and then ascension. And I'm going to get clear on the process later. As the legislation slowly makes its way through the legislative process. There are still committee hearings to come, but it is readily apparent that many of the concerns that hamstrung Bill C-10 have returned. Virtually limitless jurisdiction, overbroad scope, and harmful discoverability provisions, because this would affect the way YouTube could display Canadian content. It was going to prioritize Canadian content, which means that it would deprioritize not Canadian content, even if it's created in Canada based on the law, which means that YouTube would have to algorithmically affect the viewability, the discoverability which would prioritize certain content in Canada over other. And it would not be, I don't think it is now, but it would not be organically driven. So then we got, you know what, let's just read this here. While none of these concerns should come as a surprise, what is surprising is how ill-prepared the government appears to address the criticism. Well, they were ill-prepared the last time. Why would an incompetent government be any better off to cover up for their misdirection this time? Indeed, the communication strategy seems based primarily on presuming that Canadians won't bother to read the legislation. They won't. And will therefore take misleading assurances at face value. They will. They did last time. Why would it be any different? They did last time, and then they re-elected the Trudeau government, albeit with a minority. They re-elected the very same government that misled them on the law that they did not take the time to read. Consider the latest attempt to assuage concerns. A cartoon of Canadian Heritage Minister Pablo Rodriguez providing an assurance that the bill's changes won't affect individual Canadians since the changes only apply to companies. The cartoon it only applies to companies. How about if those individuals are operating their social media platform through a company for whatever the reason? You know, there's a lot of, you can think of nefarious reasons. There's a lot of legitimate reasons. Protection from exposure. Tax reasons. The cartoon sparked an instant mashup that pointed to the direct effects of on digital-first creators. Further, the changes don't apply only to companies. Bill C-11 treats audio-visual content as programs subject to potential regulations. This was the same thing under Bill C-10. With exceptions that could easily capture TikTok or YouTube videos, the bill is about more than just large companies. They made a joke that Bill C-10 was effectively the rebel media bill, where what it clearly intended to govern and therefore suppress were the alternatives to state-funded media. Let's see. Did you know, this is a tweet from the Canadian Heritage. Did you know the Online Streaming Act would not apply to digital-first creators? Users of social media services would never face obligations. Michael Geist has been reliable. Once again, this is misleading. Let's just read this in highlight. While it is true that users will not be treated as broadcasters due to the Section 4.2 opens the door to regulating their content. They might not directly face obligations, but if their content is caught by the Act, the implications for digital-first creators is enormous and potentially damaging. We'll see what's in the bill after we pass it. Oh, so let's see here. I mean, we don't need to go through the whole thing. I'll clip this and you can read it. But the bottom line, it's just a little bit of history. It's a little bit of history repeating, recent history. The policy direction has two primary goals. First, it will focus on the importance of consultation and special consideration of the needs of equity-seeking groups. Second, the direction will make clear areas where regulation is needed, as well as areas where flexibility should be exercised. Concerned about the implications of the regulation of video games, Sorbo assured the House that the policy direction will also specify the government's intent when it comes to video games. And gaming is a very big industry in Canada, whether it's in Vancouver, Montreal, or here in Ontario. I will repeat again that video games are not to be regulated. How about Canadian... Nobody's going to read the law. By and large, nobody's going to care about the law because by and large, it doesn't... whether or not it could incidentally capture my mom's Facebook account, highly unlikely. That's not who they want to go after with it. That's not who it would indirectly capture in their net of any relevance or importance. It's not conspiracy. It is common sense that this is intended. First of all, it's a money grab. Everybody knows that. The government imposes regulations to create financial obligations and to create potential financial exposure from penalties. Yeah, I got to renew my license every year. And remind me, I got to do that again for my birthday. You don't renew your license, you get a bigger... I got the registration for my car and I didn't sign the paper registration. I didn't sign it. I got the registration in the mail or wherever you get it, put it in my user manual in the car, didn't sign the piece of paper registration for my car. I got pulled over for speeding. I was going 128 in a 100. I came back from Ontario. Is this when it happened? Anyways, whatever. Ontario, the speed limit's 110. You get used to that. I got a ticket for not having signed my registration because apparently there's a provision in the Road Vehicle Safeties Act, whatever it's called, Code de la Sécurité Routière. You have to physically sign with a pen to paper your registration. I could have done it 30 seconds before the cop came to the car. I didn't know that this provision existed. $120 ticket for not having signed a piece of paper, which is the registration for my vehicle. I don't even understand the reason for it. More laws, less justice. It's in, don't renew your corporate filings, tickets, fines. Anyways, setting that aside. No, it's not miles per hour, people. It's kilometers per hour. Even when I speed, I don't do it recklessly. So it's on the one hand a money grab of those who should be governed, legitimately, if you want to call it that, by the law. On the other hand, it's just another money grab because people who don't know of the regulations, nul n'est censé ignorer la loi. Ignorance of the law is no excuse. Tickets up the wazoo. Annual filings. Failure to file, whatever. Failure to respect certain provisions, tickets. It's good for the government. And then the indirect. This is intended to suppress directly or indirectly by downgrading some content so that YouTube does not promote it and promotes other content. Canadian content. Who do you think YouTube would be compelled to promote? If I'm thinking out loud, CBC, Radio-Canada, Legacy Media, good old Canadian content. Who would they suppress? Maybe not JJ McCullough, because he creates enough Canadian content that it might be. JJ McCullough is another Canadian YouTuber. Great stuff also. But maybe not JJ McCullough, because he creates a lot of Canadian content. Maybe they would even promote JJ McCullough. Maybe they would even promote me on YouTube. Or maybe they wouldn't if they don't like maybe JJ McCullough or I might be a little critical of the government or favorable of the opposition. Maybe then, Anyway, so that's it. Bill C-11, I'm going to follow it. I'd like to get Michael Geist on so he could explain where it's at, the process, because I know it goes through public debate as laws should. Laws like vaccine passports, lockdowns, curfews, those should have gone through a public debate as well. Evidentiary hearings, et cetera, et cetera. Justin Trudeau's not a dictator. François Legault is not a dictator. They just passed legislation with no legislative process. But I know there's the debate process. I know there's a first reading, second reading, third reading. I know it goes through a vote in the House of Commons, the Senate, and then it gets royal assent. I don't know how long it takes. And I don't know where we are in that process. I just know that Bill C-11 is just as bad as Bill C-10. The attempt to cover up why it's just as bad as Bill C-10 is just as bad as when Guilbeault did it with Bill C-10. And in the interim, it could, if it passes, could and would meaningfully impact what we now understand and appreciate being the free internet. 'Tis not true. Nobody will read the bill. Many will read it. Many will send emails, call their MPs, senators, etc. When these avenues fall on deaf ears, many will show up in Ottawa and protest only to be shut down. What options remain? You can't save people if this is what democracy wants. They will vote themselves into their own silence. They can vote themselves into it. They just will not be able to vote themselves out of it because they won't be able to speak out against the government once a lot of these measures come into play. Your wife told you not to only give us bad news. Good news? It's Friday? Good news. Well, I don't know who's going to be on the panel with Hunley, but it'll be a good panel. So that, I believe, is all that I had on the menu. Hold on, let me just see one more thing here. No evidence, stream. Yeah, so that's what I had on the menu. Come on, the Gavin Newsom wasn't bad news. The good news is some people are fighting against it. Some politicians are fighting against it. The bad news? The bad news is it seems that the world is falling off a cliff faster than it can be caught, and it doesn't seem that there's enough people out there who want to catch it.